Welcome everyone to night 2 of the 8th annual Rubenstein Internship and Research Slam. It's amazing that there have been 8 years of this. I've been able to now experiencing my second time going around, and it's just amazing to have all these incredible presentations and just the work your heart and soul has been poured into for the last stretch of time. I just want to start off with the acknowledgement that we are on the unceded territory of the Abenaki people, past and present, their ancestral and current homeland. And that's where a lot of your work took place this summer as you gained familiarity with it and probably learned lots of lessons from the historical past and the current times. So I just wanted to start off with that. It's going to be an amazing event tonight. Just a couple of things. Our roster is just a little switched, but just at the beginning. So if you're looking at the roster, the person that's before you will still be going before you. Just everyone's moved down one slot. Also, we're going to try and stay as close as we can to 3 minutes per person. There are about 29 presentations tonight. So if everyone goes over by 1 minute, you can do the math on that. So that is a lot of presentations to get through, and we're really excited to have you. To help with timing, especially like 3 minutes for one person, 5 minutes for two, we have a big group presenting, so you'll have 10 minutes if you need it. Kathy Shigagatula will be your timing extraordinaire. This sound will go off when you've reached the 3 minute mark. So when you hear that sound, please wrap up your thoughts. If you have extra slides, I will go through them for you just because what you have to say is important, but try and condense them as much as possible so that we can get through all the presentations. Kathy will also be giving you a 1 minute warning. So if you're facing Kathy in this direction, just look for the sign. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Grant up to get us all started here. I can click it for you if you'd like.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll be presenting on my research this summer on community assembly and community trajectory. It's about the impact and invasive native species removals in Western Montana. Specifically, I did this in the Bob Marsh Wilderness on U.S. Forest Service land. I work on a trail crew out there and figured it'd be a good way to spend some extra hours on my off days. I conducted it with a partner at the Lewis and Clark College. We aim to learn more about the relationships between invasive and native species coexisting within plots and how the removal of one or the other will affect the overall assembly of the ecosystem there. Specifically, we are also looking at it across several elevations to see how we could model in upper elevations the community being impacted by 2 degrees of warming, which we would see about from the total of 1,500 feet of elevation change that we worked across.
It's just a little slow.
For experimental design, we had 8 elevations, each 50 yards apart, 150 feet. We had 6 plots at each elevation. 3 plots, we removed the dominant native species. At the other 3 plots, we removed the dominant non-native species. We also measured for any patterns we could find in terms of species dominance, in terms of richness and diversity. We measured how many of each type of other plant we also saw in the plots so that we could do some post hoc analysis and see what we would end up seeing. We hit a lot of problems and experimental hiccups, the least of which were a large number of wildfires, requiring me and some of my crewmates to be taken out of the backcountry. We're working about 20 miles away from the nearest trailhead. So naturally, it was hard to get to our sites and work with that. Some rain took out a lot of our equipment. And at one point, we had to completely reinvent the project in the field without any cell service or contact. So we had to hit Mariano on InReach, which was exciting. So obviously, what I learned from this, a lot of adaptability, having to be open to that sort of change in the field, super important. Detail-oriented work, very important. Making sure that everything is diligently and meticulously considered really helps improve the quality of our data, especially when you consider the hiccups we had later on. And being able to constantly reevaluate and check in with the objectives and goals to make sure that we were on track and not needing to reimagine our experiment in terms of time frame and everything else. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my team with the United States Forest Service, especially Tepe, Maria, and Alexis, as well as Mariano, my advisor, for helping me with this project.
Okay, next up we have Leslie. Great, just give me like a little.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Leslie, and this summer I was the cold air pooling intern in Carol Adair's lab that was based at the Forestry Sciences lab here on Spear Street, as well as some sites across northern New England. So cold air pooling is this phenomenon where colder air pools in these pockets at lower elevations compared to higher elevations. So there's this temperature immersion happening. And so Carol's lab was trying to study this and see how like climate change would impact it, as well as the plants and animal species. So I mostly worked with Marie, who's my supervisor, as well as some other folks from the forestry lab. And fieldwork consisted of hiking up 1,000-meter elevation gradients and going through and switching out these temperature sensors that have been put out in previous field seasons. So it was a lot of hiking. So we hiked 90 miles and like 30,000 feet of elevation across the summer. So it's kind of like the cool thing that Marie calculated. And so I was also back in the lab for a lot of the summer doing like sensor testing before we went out, data processing after, and we also developed some protocols for the people who will be taking over the project after this field season. And so this was like really cool because I got to see like how you can make protocols and data like more accessible to the science community, which doesn't happen enough, I think. So this was like really cool thing to see. Also did some lab work, which I had never done before other than like chemistry class. And then like random other projects that Marie had me help out on. Was helping out a master's student. And so I think the main highlights of this was just like seeing how research is done. I had never done any sort of research before. So just seeing like what goes on behind the scenes, as well as like backcountry navigation and like hiking off trail and learning field safety skills and all of that. As well as like managing data and being in the lab. And so tips for anyone who like wants to do field work. It's definitely like really unpredictable and you never know what your schedule is going to be or like what the weather will be. So definitely be aware of that. And when you're applying for jobs and like understand what your limits are, it's like being out in the field every day is fun, but like can kind of get old. So like know before you like apply to things or accept a job, like know what you want to do, your limits. And even if you don't want to do research, I suggest like just doing it because it's such valuable experience that can be translated into lots of other jobs in the future. And yeah, thank you, Megan and the perennial internship crew. It was so much fun. So.
Great. Up next is Erin.
So I was the UVM forest steward. And that's crazy. I'm sure most of you know Jericho. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, which is over, surprisingly, in Jericho up on Tarbox Road. But we additionally have 3 more research forests that I was also helping with. One in Wolcott, one in Washington, and one in Talcott. You've probably been to the one in Talcott. It's the one right by the golf course. That photo has like the tiniest little golf ball right against this like massive cliffside that they had like taped off, like caution tape all around it. And then Wolcott was like an old Christmas tree farm, and then Washington is gorgeous. It's in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what that phone is. Neither did Jess, who was my advisor. I don't know what's up with that. But it was an old agricultural field that instead of coming back like white pine, it came back maple ash, which was so beautiful. So what did I do? I did a lot of boundary line work, which was basically just most of the time, you know, you have updated surveys, you resurvey a piece of land, like every like 5 to 10 years or so. The last time a lot of these forests had been surveyed was the 70s. So they were really due for an update. So it was just a lot of trekking out along the boundaries, following old barbed wire or old signs of tape. You could see like the discolored bark, which was really cool, and finding really cool wolf trees. And wolf trees are just like the tree that you see in the middle of an otherwise open field that is left when that field's abandoned. And so it just like stays there and creates this whole unique canopy around it, which is really cool. And then I also did some harvest marking for the harvest that happened over at Talcott, which was awesome. It was, I think, like 17 acres, where it was a partial clear cut of some really badly diseased pine and spruce, and then a shelter wood of some other areas, which was awesome. Okay, I'll hurry along a little bit. That was cool. Next, general odd tasks. I cut a lot of firewood. Do you guys know the yurt platform in Jericho? That's gone now. I did that. There's bump sides on your road to Jericho, and there are water bars that are way too deep. And if you felt it on the bus, I'm sorry, I did that. Next one. And then I did trail maintenance. There's a lot of crazy trails in Jericho. I almost got lost in Jericho because it was so wet I could not open my phone. I regret that we went to touchscreen and we don't have buttons anymore. Next. And then tips. There were so many bugs this summer. Jericho was so bad over the summer. Literally, you could not have skin exposed. And then, yeah, you get to something new. Whoever does the internship next year will have to find all the boundary markers that I couldn't find. Jess has a metal detector now, and she is going to find them. I promise you that. Highlights, I did cool stuff. There were cool bugs there. Wow, I did it.
Thank you, Erin. All right, we got Spencer.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I was the wetland field tech intern with the state Agency of Natural Resources in the wetland department. We mostly went across Vermont, and I took the bus to Montpelier most days, to National Life in the Dewey Lab, where we kept our water testing gear, and we did plots in priority wetlands, restoration project areas, and some random stratified plots. I was on the bioassessment team, which was 2 people and me, and we did 2 different levels of bioassessment, one being a Vermont rapid assessment method, the other being level 3, which was more in depth, including some water sampling, as well as analyzing soil cores, and then a more in-depth vegetative assessment in quadrats. And then I also wrote a report for the state on how to implement a long-term monitoring project to track trends in wetlands across the state. This work is definitely important, just as far as tracking what's going on in wetlands. And right now we don't go back to wetlands as much to like see what's happening year to year. So that's the importance of figuring out how to implement a long-term monitoring project. But they can be pretty difficult. So I reached out to a lot of different people in that field and figured out some paths to get there. And then we visited some ag fields that are being returned to wetland, as well as some dam removals to assess the condition of those and see if their techniques to restore it are effective. And then overall, I just learned a lot about how to analyze ecosystems as a whole. I feel like I could be kind of in any ecosystem and be able to see like the water regime and the soil core, see what's going on with the water, the plant communities, and just like see how all of those things interact. And that really just says a lot about what's going on. And then I can identify some different wetland types now, and a lot of them. ID a lot of plants and analyze soils, which has been helpful. My soil class this semester, and then also becoming confident communicating some needed extra support, because I did need that this summer with some health issues. And then got to know Vermont a bit better, and we rediscovered a rare plant, the Virginia chain fern, that hadn't been documented since 1912, which was cool. collaborated with a lot of people. Yeah, which was really awesome. Got to hear a lot of different perspectives, and next worked with like a lot of my crew was mostly women and gender non-conforming people, which was very affirming, and learned about the injustices within the regulatory system. Communicate, ask questions, enjoy the vlogs, practice plant ID.
Leah, you're up.
My name is Leah Mueller, and this summer I worked at Parasol Structure. So Parasol is a solar company that builds solar canopies in the form of carports, both over parking lots and parking garages. They focus on the commercial scale, which means that they do a lot of different types of projects. Some of the projects they do are for universities, public schools, and private offices. So as an intern at Parasol, one of the first things my supervisor and I did was we sat down and we chose 6 states that I would focus my research on. And this was based on the existing projects that they had already done. So there I focused on state policy and market research, specifically what states have legislation in progress that relates directly to solar canopies. And then from that, I expanded a bit more and I went to federal level. So how do laws like the IRA impact the solar industry? So I provided Parasol with information on where they should prioritize bidding of projects, which not only helps them as a company, but it also helps us deploy more solar. So this is one of my highlights. That's me from the Boston skyline. I went to Watertown and toured a construction site, and this site was of particular interest to me because this town passed a new ordinance that actually requires that all new commercial buildings have solar on top. So this was a really cool experience for me as a policy major to be able to see environmental policy in action. This is another highlight. I went to New York City to go to a solar summit. Parasol was a sponsor and an exhibitor, so I got to sit at the booth answering questions about Parasol. And then I also listened to panels hosted by the conference from different experts in solar. And this was actually the New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, who came and gave a presentation. So this internship taught me a lot, but I'm only going to focus on a few. So specifically, I learned about policies and legislation that focus on solar canopies, and then also how policies like the IRA use tax incentives to push progressive ideas in green energy. So this summer, I learned a lot, obviously, and it was a great experience. I learned not only directly about the solar industry, but also just general professional skills. Some advice that I have to other interns looking at the energy sector is to just go for it, even if you don't know specifically about the industry that you're entering. And also, the energy sector is only made up of like 30% women employed. So it's a great opportunity if you're a woman to enter this field. I was one of 2 female interns hired, and it was a great experience.
Yeah. I worked this summer. I was the Child and Land Stewardship intern. Awesome. Oh, I will on the next slide. So MALT is the Middlebury Area Land Trust. MALT's mission is to connect the people of Addison County to natural spaces with a focus on having everybody the access to nature. MALT manages the TAM, which stands for the Trail Around Middlebury, which is a 19-mile long trail, but MALT also has some other lands like Salisbury Mills and a few others that aren't connected to the TAM. They do a TAM trek every year, which is in September. I did 2 things this summer, one of which was trail work. Here are a few photos from this, building trails and doing water bars. This is from my first day doing trail work. It was one of the first days of the torrential rain that we got this summer. So I was the wettest I have ever been. And I spent a semester in Costa Rica. So if that ages at all how wet I was. This is Bess. She helped me so much. She was my co-intern on trails. That's her using a chainsaw. And my other half was doing the nature camp educator. This I absolutely adored because I love kids and I love doing nature education. I even did a week outside of my internship at the end of the summer because they're short staffed so that they could operate camp. We offered scholarships to students who were underprivileged or for whatever reason they could apply for a scholarship and attend camp for free. We had different students every week, or different campers every week, ranging from preschool aged all the way up to like 13, 14, depending on the camp. We did hiking camps. We did a lot of camps out of Otter Creek Gorge, if you're familiar with that, with just a focus on connecting campers to nature. The historic flooding impacted the TAM a lot. It made trail work the most important it's ever been. Supporting summer camp, like I said, I worked a week outside of it, and I tried to focus on Malt's mission of, this is why I applied to this internship, because connecting people with nature, all people, trying to allow people in more urban areas the ability to connect. And 3 key learnings, I learned how to interact with children way better than I did before because as far as children goes, the best is with experience. Trail work is never ending. I'll have to have a positive attitude or else you will not get through it. I have just grown so much as an educator in general. Tips for the future: get to know Middlebury. It's a very cute town. Take advantage of working with a small organization. I loved everybody I worked with and really got to know everybody at Malt, and it was incredible. And like I said before, having a positive attitude with trail work is a must. And yeah, thank you to all of these people. Much love to Malt and the fam.
Yeah. So everyone, smells a little pungent in here. Yeah, you can smell something back there? Yeah, it is. It smells a little bit like something, but I know it's not weed. Okay. Welcome everyone to Mad River Not Weed Project. So we work in the Mad River Valley with 2.5 towns. 2 officially, 1 was kind of off the books a little bit. And we removed Japanese knotweed, which kind of takes over riverbanks and increases erosion and really just takes out all the other native vegetation. So this is the fam. We have some overseers, right? And then the youth. Right? So we can get started on whoever's presentation is first. Beauty, yeah, very beautiful over here. We worked along rivers, really wherever this stuff got. It can't really reproduce with seeds. It reproduces vegetatively. So whenever chunks of it would get flung around through the gravel. So wherever it went, it really just took over and we'd be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was part of the mapping team, and we all 3 of us, it was Nick, Sophie, and we all did different parts of the map. And specifically, I would I would create a new feature class, and then I would manually put in the coordinates that Sophie would get into the field, and I'd vary the symbology. And these are some of the maps that we created. And something that I learned from this was how to create maps this way. I'd never really taken data from the field and actually put them into ARC this way. So that was one of the things that I.
So as Jaylyn said, I took data in the field. So I took the location of knotweed sites, the coordinates, and then the size and intensity of those knotweed sites. Wrote them down all manually. I know there's a lot of nice technology out there. We did not use any of that. There was a lot of issues. I also was working with the social media team. I created informational infographics to empower the community and educate them about knotweed. I also reached out to other conservation commissions and surrounding towns to see if they were interested in the knotweed effort, and I think that future interns should definitely keep this up. I think it's a great way to reach out. And I researched various invasive species with Ash, and we created a little guide to them for the town to use.
Cool. I'm Ash. I was the project coordinator for the season. So I helped kind of coordinate the project between the 3 different towns and UVM and 8 in total interns. And all of we called them side missions. So that included putting a lot of effort into our social media outreach, all the GIS work, and then public outreach, including going to the farmers market. Yeah. I helped plan the work week and facilitate our weekly volunteer days in each town. And connecting this to some DEIJ stuff, we really did a great job of bringing accessible science education to the community in really digestible ways, and making our community volunteer days really fun and inclusive for anyone in the community who wanted to come will not be. In addition to doing coordination stuff, I also removed a lot of knotweeds. I created some educational Instagram posts and then helped out with some invasive research, as well as participating in a community education day for the local news, educating everyone about best practices in removing knotweed and writing up a mid-season report on everything that we did, and making some t-shirts. Some tips I had was organization was super key for me. And advocating for myself about when I felt like I was doing too much and needed more support. And meeting with my supervisors was really helpful. Advocating for communication is really important.
All right, so my job was mainly focused on the outreach to the community. I did this mainly through social media. I also went to the farmers market with Jack. Go to the next slide. These are a couple of examples of the social media posts I would make, just trying to educate the public about knotweed, about our projects, stuff like that. And I have a couple of stats about the end of the season. We gained 130 followers, over 1,000 views on one of our reels, and over 1,000 accounts reached on Instagram. For the TikTok, we created it this year, so we only gained 40 followers, but we also had videos that had 900 plus views, and we gained 600 likes on total TikTok page. And then this kind of shows the mid-season when we were like working on it regularly. The bottom graphic, it shows like posts that are similar to our, and we had less followers, but we had twice the amount of new followers and almost 5 times the amount of content interactions on our social media, and it shows the trend of our social media going.
Yeah, so it's labor first and foremost, but I did have to do some side work. So, I was elected human resources in the beginning of the summer and resolve some not too bad cases actually. So I have to keep it confidential, so then I also did data. Beginning of the summer, I took data to see kind of what plants were there, what percentage of the plot was knotweed and other plants, and we collected that data to see how effective our management efforts were long term. See what new plants come in, and if our management is actually hurting the knotweed, sending it into remission. And then, I was also tasked with researching what type of seed we kind of want to apply on these fields, these disturbed areas. So here, each town was different. Some towns had little patches that we'd have to go after, and they're surrounded by native vegetation, so we didn't feel the need to apply any seed. But here, there's like big expanses of 100% knotweed that we took down. And just to kind of stabilize the soil and put something in there to, naturally compete with the knotweed, we had to think about, what type of seed we're going to use, whether it's native seed or a mix or wildflowers. And at the end of the day, we just chose like a, biodiversity grass mix. It was just like 5 species maybe, just to get some in the soil. And I like using a shovel.
So I helped the social media team mainly create video content. I made like 3 TikToks and I was pretty impressed and proud of them. This is one of them about kind of erosion and how how knotweed typically is on the banks of the Mad River and how kind of horrible that can be for keeping our like rivers from not eroding our banks. And the flooding really, really impacted that a lot. And it became a big worry for us as like the season went on is what happened to the knotweed when the Mad River went over its banks, I deep dove into allelopathic chemicals and how it contributes to invasiveness and kind of like why did knotweed get so bad. I also helped up keep team morale and I designed a really cool t-shirt as well with Ash. So I'm really impressed with it in the next slide. But I didn't really want to focus on my personal achievements too much because I really wanted to talk about how wonderful it has been to work with the team that I worked with. We had a lot of type 2 fun. I got really buff, but only in one arm, and I actually noticed it. And I fell into the river like 4 times, and that was really fun. But there was a lot of hard days of work, and the team was really, really fun. And I felt like they really challenged me to change some of my thoughts and feelings about the natural world, something that I feel like is a little bit more holistic. Because I tend to fall in, I think, to a very scientific viewpoint, but that's not the only thing that the natural resources does for us. There's a big spiritual and kind of community-based connection that I think my viewpoint is missing. So having these we had hour-long drives every day, 5 of us crammed into a little, my car's a VW Golf, so we're all crammed in there. And so I got really close. We got to talk about a lot of things. It has really contributed to making me feel like a better environmentalist. And if I could have one piece of advice for interns, it's be appreciative of where you are and be appreciative of it with who you're with. Because I think the Mad River was all the more beautiful with the people that I met. Thank you.
Yeah, Elliott.
Hi, I'm Elliott. I did a summer internship with DHS Support. So DHS Support is a consulting company, and what do consultants do? They're basically hired experts that give their opinions to private organizations. And this can be in any field, but they are specifically an environmental consulting company. And they do work in all of these things, but I focus on Superfund projects. What are Superfund projects? You guys probably know, but a lot of people don't. Superfund is when an area is so polluted that the EPA steps in and helps organize cleanup. And they basically find who is accountable for the pollution and charge them for the cleanup. And so consultants give advice and expertise to these parties that are held financially liable. And so I specifically worked on the Hackensack River in New Jersey. It's a major waterway in the state and it is super polluted. And so cleanup on this river has not yet started. So EHS is interested on, collecting information about who might be liable. And I was assigned to a site on the Hackensack River. And I basically looked into their operational history, their past pollutants used, how could these pollutants move to the water, all of this type of stuff. And it was really interesting. The Hackensack River is really polluted. If you live in New Jersey, that's really fun for you. And then, so details, I work with EHS remotely and in person. So 10-week program, and 3 of those weeks were remote, or 3 of those weeks were in person in Philly, and then 7 weeks were remote at home. I was in Burlington, Washington. And I basically just created a report and a final presentation about this industrial site. I learned a lot. So why do we care? The Hackensack's really polluted. This builds up in sediments, eventually gets to fish and birds and to us. And it's a really populated area, and people use fish for subsistence more than you might think. And so this is really dangerous for a lot of people. And my work is just like a piece of the puzzle. So why do we care 2.0? Pollution disproportionately affects minorities and people of low income. So cleanup is a good way to move forward and try and provide justice to these groups. The EPA provides a social justice map if you're interested. And key learning. The work that I did is confidential, so I can't discuss details, but I did learn how to characterize a highly complex river system. I learned how closely related human health and natural resources are. And then I learned how to approach complex problems and work through challenges. And oh, I got a lot better at pool. You can hit it again. There's a pool table in the office. And highlights my experience. As you can see, this is mostly women, which is really fun. And then Erin. And so I got to work with experts in my field. I worked with a team of interns that had a variety of expertise, and they provided a bunch of lectures from the staff, which was super cool. So I learned about hydrology, pollution movement, Superfund history, pollutant degradation, and analytical processes. So it was super informative. And tips and tricks. If you're interested, the application goes live in winter break. I spent a lot of time on the application, and I prepared for the interview. And then throughout the entire program, I asked a bunch of questions. I had patience because it was a really challenging internship. And I stayed connected to other interns because it's better to suffer together than by yourself. And yeah, thanks.
Dexter and I interned with the Agency of Natural Resources in the Parks and Recreation Department, mostly focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion on the SCORE. And the SCORE stands for the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. And basically every 5 years, every state needs to reassess every outdoor recreation opportunity within their state and think of what do we need to improve, what do the people that live in the state want, and the SCORE produces a set of priorities, and this will inform the funding in the next 5 years after the SCORE comes out for improvements in outdoor recreation. Next slide. So there's a lot of steps to the SCORE practice or for the SCORE process, mainly being the survey process, which is the public input survey. So they have to gather information of what does the public want, where are they recreating, what they want to recreate with. And they do a lot of focus groups, and this actually will be going on in the spring, so I didn't really focus on that a lot. But my internship was mostly focused on research and collaborative input and partnerships within the state of Vermont to kind of find out what's going on DEI-wise within the state and outdoor recreation. So throughout my internship, I met a lot with provider groups, outdoor recreation, organizations and groups that support marginalized communities, and getting them outside and understanding what are the access barriers in Vermont. How can the Agency of Natural Resources help overcome these barriers, and what can we put in the SCORE priorities so that in the next 5 years, we really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion to create a more inclusive outdoor experience in the state of Vermont. Yeah, so I learned a lot of things, but mostly just related to my internship. DEI work is never done. I feel like I was always like, oh, I found this great information. This is awesome. I gave it to my boss, and she was like, that's good, but boom, 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 here's 10 more questions and I need you to complete researching. So I was always meeting with a lot of new people and learning new barriers and new opinions and new experiences that people had that I had never thought about before. Also, outdoor recreation is really important for our minds and bodies. As Naomi said earlier, there's a really community-based aspect to being outdoors, and helping people overcome these barriers to get outdoors really creates a more inclusive community. And also, lastly, just because Vermont isn't as racially diverse or diverse in a lot of other ways as some other states, it does not mean that diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't important, and that we can't continue to create a safe space in all of our outdoors for all people that live here or the people that visit. And some tips for future interns. Oh, a couple other people said this.
Take initiative on your project and don't be afraid to go the extra mile. Keep an open mind every day. My internship also changed a lot throughout the course of just being there, and every day I had to kind of reassess what even I was doing. But I learned a lot of things I didn't think I would learn, and also make personal connections with people that you're around. It helps a lot, and you can learn a lot from the people. And yeah, last slide, I just had organizations to highlight that I thought were really awesome and did a really good job at promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state.
You too. Good job.
Hi, my name's Rea. This summer, I did an internship at the College Settlement in Philadelphia. College Settlement year round, they run an outdoor school, and then in the summer they have an overnight camp and a day camp. And I work at the overnight camp. And there's a lot of information on the following slides, and I'm not going to go super in depth in the interest of time. But if you have any questions, you can find me some other time. So I worked as a counselor, and under that there was an umbrella. It was like an umbrella of a lot of different responsibilities. So I worked primarily with 13 and 14-year-olds, and a lot of the work I did was leading environmental lessons. So I led a lot of lessons at the environmental center that we had at camp, where we had goats and chickens and donkeys and a bunch of reptiles. I also led a lot of lessons at the sustainable agriculture farm that we partner with at camp, called Penny Pack. So I got to work with kids there. Also the kids I worked with, they were 13 and 14, so they were in a program called Green Adventure. So we left camp a lot, and I got to take them on nature hikes, and we would go to wildlife rehabilitation centers and different museums like the Franklin Institute, and then some more adventure-based stuff like whitewater rafting. These are just a couple pictures of some of the kids we worked with, and you can see there's lots of hanging out with animals and building stuff in nature. So I think this slide's really important, learning from kids, because I think as an adult or the young adult, it's really easy to just think that kids are inferior to you and that they don't have a lot to teach you, but it's really important to remember that education is reciprocal. And I learned a lot this summer from kids, a lot just in how you can work best with kids. Kids are incredibly curious about all sorts of stuff. Yet if I were to stand up and try and talk to my kids and give them a little lecture, they did not care at all. So I really had to adjust a lot of my practices, and I learned about how to like kind of create this inclusive education environment where you just encourage your kids to be curious and ask questions, and then integrate just lessons in all your conversations with them. These are just some highlights I'll really go through. I would have my kids do these nature competitions where we'd be like walking from one place to the next, and I'd just be like, guys, I need you to find me your coolest nature moment, and they'd bring me all these weird mushrooms and insects and stuff, and then I would pick a winner. And we also would harvest like fruits and vegetables from the farm and have like a Master Chef Junior cook off each session where they learned to build a fire and cook over it, which was really fun. Equity, diversity, and social justice at camp was also a huge part of my experience this summer. Most of the kids that I was working with are from Philadelphia, and a lot of them come from really low socioeconomic status families. So just kind of, I learned a lot about making the natural world really accessible. And so camp's philosophy is really to just get over these barriers to the outdoors that lots of people experience because of their race or their socioeconomic status. Additionally, I think science communication is incredibly important, and that was a huge part of this summer. Kind of making that all. Yeah. Tips for future interns: love kids, be curious about them, appreciate their curiosity, and be flexible. Each kid that I interacted with was incredibly different, and I was always kind of having to change my approach to teaching them. And recognize that teaching is a relationship, which I kind of touched on earlier. And that's all I got. We got Claire and Jane. All right. I'm Claire.
I'm James.
So we worked for the Lake Champlain Basin Program. All right. So what is the Lake Champlain Basin Program, also known as the LCBP? It's a congressionally designated initiative to protect Lake Champlain and the watershed. It focus a lot on stewardship and managing feeded managing other species. Our role
was to basically talk to voters, check their votes for aquatic invasive species, and perform decontaminations. We also took part in hand harvest. It was really fun getting to protect the public. The voters of Vermont are definitely a unique group of people, and they're a lot of fun to get to know, and a lot of people were super curious and really receptive to it.
So some big impacts of the program in keeping the lake clean and keeping out as many invasive species as we possibly can. There's already a lot of native species in Lake Champlain, but just this season someone caught hydrilla, which is really a species that we have been concerning in the Adirondacks especially. So that was coming from like Texas or something. They found a tiny little piece which could have propagated into thousands of plants in the and you know, the harvests were really fun, but we also didn't really get that many plants, which is actually a good thing because the guides on these harvests were telling us that just a couple of years ago there were thick mats, thousands of plants, and now we're just getting one. So big key learnings from this summer was we really are identifying invasive species, obviously, but we also learned how to read the lake and how healthy it is. We saw the effects of the flooding. We saw the lake rise like for the summer, and it was also very unique talking to the public with an environmental outreach message. It's very different when you're not waiting for that to come to you and waiting for people like us who are all interested in it, wanting to hear what you have to say, and you actually are trying to get them interested. It didn't always work.
So some of our highlights, it was really fun to decontaminate the boats. There's a girl over there with always the BBC came by. That's me. He took that picture. Sprayed him down. It was a lot of fun. We also got to use like the industrial ones, which was fun. Very loud, but a lot of fun too. It was nice to talk to the boaters. A lot of people were super friendly and kind, and just very supportive of what we were doing. It was nice to know people also care about that who are recreating in these places. Go to South Lake was really fun. Harvest water chestnuts, TBC, and that was a fun time. And James went to Paul Smith's campus for training, and that was really super cool. Tips for future intern. Oh, is that you? Okay. For future interns, don't be afraid of a busy launch. The public does like to learn. Just communicate. We loved everyone on the team with us, and our bosses were really great and super knowledgeable. Taking advantage of the decontamination, it's a lot of fun and it's getting it.
Yeah, keeping it brief, we personally didn't get to do a whole lot with Equity University, but you know, making the lake a welcoming place for everyone, we could do that, and the LCBP is also doing a lot of really great outreach work with different cultural groups in the area, so you can definitely check out the website there.
So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura. I work as an inland lake scientist intern with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, Lisa Pond's program this summer. And I had the pleasure of working with Leslie Matthews and Kelly Merrill, who are two senior scientists in the program. And then Izzy Anderson was my co-perennial intern. And so the main thing we did this summer was conduct point intercept plant surveys on some of the inland lakes. So we'd have a grid of survey points. We'd navigate to them with handheld GPS, drop a rake down there, twist it, pull up some plants, and then ID them to kind of get a picture of what was going on in the lake. And then we were partnering with Tetra Tech, an environmental consulting company. They visited the same lakes, did some water quality sampling, saw what macroinvertebrates were there, and then we pooled the data to develop bioindicators for lake health, and that's a currently ongoing process. And then we also did regional monitoring network sampling of a couple lakes. So an RMN is just a regional network. It's very grassroots. You just pool all of your data and you can get a bigger picture of what's going on at a larger scale, which is especially important for understanding kind of what's going on with climatic changes. And then just here's a couple pictures of us out in the field.
IDing plants in the parking lot, and then doing some community foraging. The biggest thing I learned was IDing Vermont invasive and native plant species to genus and species. I learned a little bit about motorboat operation, trailering, and then kind of what it's like to work in natural resources in the state government. So, you know, there's 800 plus lakes in Vermont. We only got the opportunity to visit, you know, 10 or 15. So you have to make choices about resource allocation given your time and given your funding. And there are definitely environmental justice implications involved there because you have some lakes that are completely, you know, privately owned, and maybe there's a larger voice there, and then there's a greater impetus for actions to be taken there, even though public lakes have more people accessing them. And then also it was great to show up at boat launches and have community members interested in the work we were doing. So my highlights were just seeing amazing wildlife, amazing scenery, running into a couple of the interns in this room, and then working with an amazing team of all women. And we got to do some fun things like going on an overnight trip and swimming in some cool swimming holes. And then my tips for future interns, definitely ask questions. I asked a lot, I learned a lot. And then for field work, make sure you're hydrating, and then make sure you're prepared for the unexpected. We didn't expect our boathouse to flood, but it happened and we learned from it. And then have fun.
I interned with the Nature Conservancy, the Vermont chapter out of the Montpelier office. You can go to the next slide. So TNC is a global nonprofit that's aimed at advancing
It's fine.
at advancing conservation. So they operate in 70 countries and then all 50 US states. So the way TNC works in Vermont is there's a southern branch and a northern branch. So I worked in the northern branch out of the Montpelier office. We protected they still protect over 30,000 acres of Vermont and 58 natural areas across the state. And all of the natural areas are public for recreation. TNC also does various restoration projects. Right now we're working on an elm tree restoration project with 7,000 trees. Which they're planting, and then they're going to do inoculation. TNC Vermont, we also worked with community partners and then conducted volunteer events like trail building. So I worked under the land stewardship department, which was under the conservation department. There was a lot of parts of the TNC office that I didn't see because there's a lot of working parts. So there were people who exclusively worked on watershed and river quality, streams, and I really didn't see any of that because I was usually out in the field. We went out on a lot of trips for trail work. That was my boss, Jack. He was the head of the stewardship department. We went on a canoe trip with Megan. She came with us. We did survey work and then managing kiosks and all that stuff. The last slide. Of course, there was a lot of flood impacts, especially because your office is in Montpelier. So the office was closed for a good 2 weeks. Nothing bad happened to the office, but it was like flooded, but none of the records were injured, but it was really cool to see. There's a lot of floodplain forests that TNC protects that were restored during the flooding. So it was really cool to visit them and survey them and see what was going on. So again, stewardship projects, we did a lot of typical stuff that you think of when you think of stew work, trail work, bridge repair, building puncheon, which is just elevated wood on wetland trails, and then boundary marking. And then I also did some stuff that I've never done before. We slept overnight at Long Pond, which is one of TNC's natural areas, and did a bird survey at 4 a.m. And then we did volunteer work, which was really awesome. And then we also did a lot of survey work. I never really worked with GIS before, and now I know it like front to back. I'd also never written a monitoring report, and now I know how to do that. So that was really cool.
Hey, I'm Rob. I was a forest tech for Bill Keaton's carbon metrics lab this summer, and we had a group of 4 different individuals of various backgrounds, ages, and technical skills and degrees, all working together. Our first week or 2 weeks was in this Mount Mansfield management project. There's 8 different big plots, as you can see. So we'd go in every day, park at the Butler Lodge area, and then walk up about 2 miles to these different cuts. And as you can see on the right, there's some group cuts, single tree selection, structural complexity enhancement, just different treatments that Bill did towards his research project about 20 years ago. So we worked in Mansfield, and then this is kind of the plot layout for what we were doing. So doing veg plots, which are those little squares, doing seedlings and saplings, and then measuring overstory trees and trimming DPHs. This is one of my coworkers, Alex. We did a lot of tree hugging, especially, in those rainy days. And then that's him on the right getting a DBH on that nice yellow birch. And we worked in Jericho Research Forest. There's also some structural complexity enhancement plots there. And we were there about 2 weeks in and out of Jericho. There's a picture of me next to a big tip up mound, which is kind of cool. And then one of my highlights from the trip was a week that we spent in Hubbard Brook, which is a massive 7,800 acre research forest. And there's a lot of ongoing forest monitoring projects. And we were luckily a part of one of those. And some of the duties that we're doing was just trying to map the dead wood and carbon retention of perennial streams in Hubbard Brook. So here's a picture of me in a stream with some D-tape, and we'd measure things like this and record that. And we also took under canopy photos to cross-reference some LiDAR pictures that they took last year. And then on the right is a view of the lake in this cabin that we got to stay in for that week. So yeah, it strengthened a lot of my skills relating to forestry and stream ecology work, northeastern plant ID, and then taking the canopy photos was also a huge highlight. And a lot of the data is being used right now by a PhD student, and it's good for stream ecologists, fish biologists. And tips for future interns: enjoy your summers in Vermont because they go by really fast, and force yourself outside no matter the weather. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Aly. I did cyanobacteria monitoring this summer. So my internship was located at the Rubenstein Science Laboratory. It's right next to the Campbell Center by the water. And we worked with the Lake Champlain Cyanobacteria Monitoring Program, which was with the DEC and the Department of Health. And that was also right by their new research vessel, which is that. So a lot of my samples came from going out on the boat and collecting them. So for my most activities, I did a lot of identification. So I learned how to identify cyanobacteria and phytoplankton, primarily under an inverted microscope. I did a lot of phytoplankton counts, so looking at each individual field of microscope and individually counting all of them, and then enter them into an Excel spreadsheet. And then FlowCam, which is this kind of big machine that's like a really fancy microscope. And the sample runs through it and then takes like 1,000+ images of everything that is running through it. And then I get sorted through. I'll show you later. And all of that would get put into a convolutional neural network, which is basically a library of all of those labeled images that will help to be able to identify everything accurately on its own without someone like me doing it. And then I had to lead these like program meetings. So the impact of this is that obviously we all know when
the beaches get shut down because of cyanobacteria. I'm kind of the reason why. I would report all of the cyanobacteria from different lakes in Vermont, which would go to Bloom reports, which is how public health can be monitored and when to shut down the lakes or not. And like I said, it would allow for that to be identified without human assistance. And this is just pictures. So like this is from flow cam and that's from the microscopes. You kind of see how I can see it more in depth and like more detailed from flow cam versus the microscope. And same thing here. This is just, I would look at all the images over here, identify what was, so like usually this is everything and then I sort it out, put it into there and label it. Key learnings, professional lab experience, just I had only done lab experience from classes, so that was really interesting to kind of get to be in a professional setting and a lot more. I learned about lake health and what causes cyanobacteria, like overflow, stuff like that. And then community research, just talking to other scientists in the building. And then just tips and highlights. I really liked using the flow cam. It was really fun getting to put it together, put it apart, because I kind of a couple of times. And connecting with other scientists. And then for tips, have a lot of patience. Everything takes a while, it takes a long time to focus everything. Ask questions to people in the building. They're all super smart and know more than I did. So I was able to learn a lot from them. Find interesting podcasts. I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts during it. And switch between tasks, take breaks, go outside, and refocus your eyes. That's all. Thank you.
Do you like what I did there with the?
Yeah, I remember. Hey, I'm Ethan. I work this summer for a company called Reese Building Innovation. So Reese RBR, it's a custom home building company. They also do energy retrofits. A lot of their energy retrofits can save 30 to 40% of energy compared to a house that's built in the 70s or something like that. They're one of the first green builders in Vermont. Chuck, my boss, has been doing it since the 1980s. And he focuses on building net zero, super insulated, and long lasting homes, which is also an important part of sustainability is having a home that'll last a really long time. These technologies like active and passive solar, as well as geothermal heating and air-to-air heat pumps to create homes that are as tight, as well insulated, and as energy efficient as possible. So they work with programs like the Vermont Green Building Network and Efficiency Vermont to try to spread some information about green building and sustainable building, and kind of provide opportunities to people to get their house retrofitted that might not otherwise. So my role primarily was carpentry. I've done a lot of carpentry in the past, but this is my first time doing framing to finish home building, which I was very excited about because I do want to be able to build my own home one day. And then on top of that, some of the more science aspects, learning some about the math and the business of how to design and build sustainable homes. And a lot of that has involved managing sustainability with reality. You can try to be as sustainable as you want, but at the end of the day, you're building a home and it's going to be messy. That one house there is a house we finished in Stowe towards the beginning of the summer, where the clients really wanted a bomb-proof home. The full frame of the house is concrete, but they also wanted a low carbon house, which kind of clashed with each other, obviously. And on top of that, there's developing the professional and the life skills. It definitely was intimidating having to talk to subcontractors, communicating with clients, but there's a lot of work going on there. And this is the house we've been working on for a while, and I've heard kind of pictures from the start to about where we are now. So that's very, very cool, very rewarding to be able to see a house go from a hole in the ground to almost solid. And yeah, thank you to Chuck Rice, who's my boss, and Megan.
We got Finn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Finn Rippey. I'm a sophomore and I'm a forestry major and a GIS minor. from Elmore, Vermont. And this summer I did a part-time internship with the Belmont Trail Commission and the Vermont Huts Association. So Belmont Trail and Vermont Huts are partnered nonprofit organizations with the goal to create the largest hut-supported single-track mountain bike optimized trail network in Vermont. It's a long-term project that was started roughly in 2002. And its goal is to connect rural communities and their respective trail networks to boost economic vitality and recreation opportunities. So part of my job was trail planning. A lot of this was co-locating the Belmont Trail with the existing Catamount Trail, which for those of you who don't know is a winter use Nordic trail that spans the length of Vermont. So as a trail planner, I would go there with a fellow trail planner, and we would assess different areas of the trail to see what kind of projects would need to be done to make the winter use trail available for summer use for equestrian, hiking, and biking. Another part of my job was being involved in hut planning, and hut planning was super new to me. I've done trail building for a long time, so trail planning was something that was in my avenue. But hut planning was a big learning experience for me. We worked on a couple of projects. One of them was a hostel in Hardwick, Vermont, which is close to home. And we worked with the select board and town manager to try and find a site available to build this hostel. The Belmont Trail will be co-located with the existing Memorial Valley Rail Trail in this location. So it was a lot about talking about how the two trails will boost the town's economy and different zoning laws. They got really into the weeds and I learned a lot about that aspect planning. Also,
Nope, go back.
Another project I worked on was the Recreation Guidebook. A Recreation Guidebook was a project that Vermont Huts had been thinking about doing for a long time, but never had the time. So I spent a couple of days at one of the huts that they had built down in southern Vermont in the National Forest in Rochester. And I assessed a bunch of local trails in the areas, hiked them, mapped them, rated them, and made trail recommendations. And this is a part of Vermont Huts program called Forest Program, Fostering Outdoor Recreation, Education, Sustainability, and Teamwork. It's a long acronym, but basically its goal is to make meaningful experiences in nature for underrepresented groups in the outdoors. So the Recreation Guidebook is meant to make these sorts of adventures more accessible for people that don't know the area. Last aspect was trail building. As I said, I do trail building full time. So this internship kind of supplemented that, but I did work on a couple of projects. This is the section I built. That was really cool. And if I had any tips, it would be to pursue your passions. This internship kind of grew from just my love of mountain biking, and I had a great time learning more about recreation development, and hut planning is a completely new aspect for me. So pursue your passions, be open, and take advantage of the connections we have at the school to make your visions kind of come true. Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Spencer. This summer I worked with Vermont Fish and Wildlife as their Clean Vessels Act outreach intern. During this internship, I worked with the Access Areas program, mostly working with the Clean Vessel Act and also their multi-year ADA plan. For those who don't know, the Clean Vessel Act is it's a federally funded grant for marinas, which pays for 75% of marinas pump out systems in exchange for the marinas not charging their customers to use these systems. A typical day for me was mostly spent on the road. I traveled to all parts of Vermont. If you see an access area, it's probably there. And most of my work involved putting in accessible parking for people in accordance with that ADA plan and making recommendations for future upgrades. Another big aspect this summer was the flood. In the weeks after the flood, me and my coworker Erin spent a lot of time traveling to the different access areas and assessing the damage so that we could report it to FEMA. This picture was taken around Dummerston. As you can see, the parking area is supposed to go way back there. And you can also see the water line from where it was. The three main takeaways I had from this internship were when I applied, my boss asked me, what did I think Fish and Wildlife does? And I said something along the lines of, I think it's about controlling natural resources for public use. But what I found out, as he put it, was a lot of it is managing people. Most of my day was spent figuring out how people were using our access areas and how we can improve those sites without impeding on that. Another thing I learned, especially during the flooding, was how to be flexible. Due to my position, I had a pretty interesting backstage look at how Fish and Wildlife reacted to the flooding. And I was like reading emails they were sending out, how many plans they were, what the plans they were changing, and so on. I also learned about planning ahead. The 88 plan they have goes years in advance, and I got the opportunity to attend meetings with archaeologists and engineers with my boss, Mike, and just hear the things they had to do in order to get those plans going in terms of financing them and getting contracts.
Hi everyone, my name is Isabelle, and I'm going to tell you about my summer as an aquatic invasive species intern. So I worked for the State Department of Environmental Conservation in the Lakes and Ponds program. Kim, in this picture here, she's on Teams. Hi, Kim, is the program lead and coordinator for the aquatic invasive species team for the state. And Olin Reed is also a full-time employee of the state working with Kim. I was fortunate to be on the team. We had one Eco America member, Leah here, who is a UVM grad and also was a perennial intern at one point, as well as three field techs, another of which Daria, who's also a UVM alumni and perennial intern at one point. So go Resner for getting out in the community. And then we had the opportunity to work with BYCC on our water chestnut, Vermont Youth Conservation Corps on our water chestnut operations, and we went out with some of the Lake Champlain boat stewards. Shout out Clare and Jaylyn. Just for a snapshot of where I worked, this is a good smattering of pictures from this summer, just overlaid on all the different places I went to in Vermont. So that was a huge highlight just to get to explore the state. I'm not from the state, and so I got to see a lot, learn a lot, experience a lot in new places, really deepen my connection to the state. And what I did, I foreshadowed a little bit of some of the things, but trying my best to condense an entire summer of a lot of field work into 3 minutes. So apologies if I zoomed through some of it, but one of those was started off a lot with plant ID. So this is just a screenshot of some of Vermont's invasive species. Hydrilla isn't actually in Vermont yet. It's on its way, and we're monitoring it in the Connecticut River. And if any of you are familiar with aquatics, you might notice that these are some different milfoils. Spend a bunch of time IDing them just so I could be proficient in the field later on. Pay attention to water chestnut and zebra mussels here. Spend a lot of time with those guys. All right, so there's some water chestnut. We'll pull some water chestnut and more water chestnut. And there's some water chestnut seeds. And there's a boat full of water chestnut. There's me in a water chestnut survey and a bucket full of water chestnut. So I spent a lot of time with water chestnut, getting real intimate with it this summer. Next slide. Trapenatans, Latin name, really briefly. The state spends $500,000 on Vermont on water chestnut operations. There's mechanical harvesters on the southern portion of the lake, but a lot of what we did and what we worked with volunteers was our hand pulling operations, super effective because each plant that you saw in the previous slide has 10, 15 rosettes, which will produce up to 20 fruits or nuts. So plant drastically has major impacts down the road. And doing water chestnut, I got a lot of experience on team management and crew leading, because when you go out, you go in these surveys of however many people you had. I even brought Laura out on one weekend just for fun to go finish up some harvesting that we didn't get to during the week. Zebra mussel sampling, another big part of the job. Zebra mussels, fingernail sized freshwater mussel. We would go out to the lakes. Currently, zebra mussels are in 2 water bodies in Vermont. And so we would go out and bring our little net tow, throw it out, pull it up, bring samples back to the lab and look for zebra mussel veligers under scopes to confirm that they weren't there. One of the most eventful days of my internship was the last of the summer. That's what this picture is from. Almost got stranded on international waters. Ask me about that another time. And I also got to work with community members and help lead these volunteer trainings. The VIP program, or Vermont Invasive Patrollers, teaches community members how to ID plants so they can go out on their own lakes and try to detect early invasions of new invasives. Vermont has 820 plus lakes and ponds with 7-8 people, simply can't get to all of them in the summer. And so this really showed me the importance of community science and action. And it is zoom through. There's Laura. Hey, Laura. Saw lots of wildlife. That was awesome. And I won't talk too much about the flooding. You've heard some of the other interns being out in the water all summer. The flood had some huge impacts. These are our offices that we went to and a lot of cleanup efforts. And so that was super eye-opening to be in a field that is very connected with the natural ecosystem and dynamics. For anyone looking to make an impact on the community, if you're a boater out there, because I'm sure you all own yachts and motorboats and everything as students, all your resources. But if you do boat and you're going between water bodies, next, clean, drain, and dry. There's Clare. Clean, draining, and drying our kayaks to stop the spread of invasives. And then, yeah, thank you. This will not have been possible.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jacob. I was a water resources technician with Stone Environmental this summer. This is a goofy picture. It's me preparing to hack my way through some knotweed to get to a water quality sampling site. Couldn't think of a better plant to hack through than knotweed with a machete. Got to learn how to use a machete, also very fun. Yeah, so Stone Environmental is an environmental consulting firm. It's based out of Montpelier. It's also 100% employee owned. So it's really cool. When I was at the office, it seemed like people were happy to be there. I know that's not how it always is in places. They have a bunch of different work groups with a bunch of different services. I was in the water resources management sector. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the tasks I had over the summer. First off was a lot of topographic surveying. That was in preparation for a wastewater system going into Westford, Vermont, which is about 20 minutes north of Essex. It was really cool. I just got to go around with this machine here. It shoots lasers all over the place and helps you measure the land surface. It was really cool to see how a rural community was happy to have us there, like helping them get better infrastructure. That was made possible a lot due to the infrastructure bill that was recently passed, and a bunch of towns actually across the state got money for stuff like this. So it was really cool. And like there was this little sandwich shop in the grocery store we would always go to for lunch, and like we ended up knowing people there. It was cool to like feel like when we went there to work, we were there with a community that knew us and like supported what we were doing. Lots of water quality sampling as well. This was the downstream of where the town of Warren's wastewater system sends its effluent. It's this gorgeous forested wetland that's downstream of like 100 feet of sand. So they've been monitoring this for the past couple of years with no change really, which is great. That's what we want to see. And then additionally, this is where I was heading, trying to get through that knotweed. We're doing a lot of pre-monitoring for systems that are going in. I also got to do some flow analyses, which was really exciting. This was something I talked about in concept in some of my classes, but I actually got to apply those ideas, which was really neat. And I actually got to write a part of a report that was sent back out to a client. So that helped me feel like I was valued this summer. You might notice potash. They are partnered with the city to do a lot of monitoring with that and a couple other streams as well. Yeah, so lots of other things. This was a soil board. We got to look at soil boards without even touching a hand auger, which was fantastic. Lots of shop work, calibrating flow meters and such. It was fun to kind of just tinker and have that space to do that. Calibrating rain gauges, which was a really valuable skill. I'm sure that'll come up again. And then I got to do some construction oversight over by St. Albans as well. So huge breadth of stuff. I got to learn a lot, which I loved. I really like learning things. I'm realizing we're all really lucky to be in school, and like having this space to learn stuff isn't always going to be around. So I definitely strongly encourage just learning as much as you can. Get paid for driving time / I didn't say that, or I didn't say to carpool or commute. Those are probably better options, but get paid for driving if you can, because it sucks to pay for gas. And then network, it's great. I am going to admit to some nepotism. I got referred to this job because I worked for my boss's wife the summer before. Didn't know they knew each other. And he just called me up one day and was like, hey, would you like this position? And I said, yes. And that was great. And at the time, I had no clue what making that relationship was going to do for me in the future, but it helped out amazingly. So I was really happy. Yeah.
So I'm a wildlife bio major, a senior. Can someone guess what species that is? Anyone? Any guesses? No.
A leopard.
Yeah, a leopard. And can anyone guess where this image is taken? Anyone?
I was right outside a second.
Yeah, so this is in my city, Mumbai, in India. Next. So I'm going to focus on my first internship experience this summer. So I interned with the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is it's headquartered in New York City, but it has country chapters all across the globe, like WCS Australia, WCS Cambodia, WCS India. And I worked with the Human and Wildlife Interactions team in Mumbai for the Mumbai Leopard Project. It's a very famous project and covered by National Geographic, and it has a lot of media exposure because it has leopards. These are urban leopards living inside the city, and the national park exists inside the city. So they interact with humans a lot, and it's very interesting. And the second one was the Mumbai Jackal Project. So I distributed my time across both the projects, and it was in partnership with the Maharashtra Forest Department, which is the state Mumbai is located in. And then I was also a remote project intern for the Urban Owl Network, which was trying to understand the anthropogenic threats owls face in Indian cities. And I was like handling all the WhatsApp group chats, talking to different citizens from different cities and getting some rescue data on owls for a PhD scholar. And then I also worked on my honors thesis on the movement ecology of free-ranging dogs in central India. So I just want to thank Nikit, who is the head of the Wildlife and Interactions team in WCS, and Debangini, who is also the PhD scholar, and for my honors thesis, Jed Murdoch, who's my advisor, and Dr. Abhi, who owns the data and works at Ashoka Trust for Ecology and Environment. Yeah, next. So the Mumbai Leopard Project. So for this season, the aim was to estimate the population density in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park using mark recapture camera trap analysis. And I deployed the camera traps, checked and retrieved data, and sorted the data. Next. So this is a leopard at 6:33 a.m. and it's going to, I don't know where it's going, but then it runs back, and then we see just after a minute, a guy is walking there. So there's so many camera trap images where there was like a leopard passing and then a dog passing, or like a lady with a kid passing. So there's a lot of very close interactions with leopards. Fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't get to see one, but I'm sure the leopard saw me a bunch of times. And we are supposed to be loud so they don't come near us inside the forest. Next, I think we can skip this. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on the Mumbai Jackal Project because it was the first survey on jackals in Mumbai, and people didn't know about jackals, it's a canid species existing in the mangroves in Mumbai. So Mumbai is a cluster of 7 islands, which was reclaimed by the British colonizers. So there are a lot of mangrove patches, and these are the golden jackals who have been spotted a lot of times. And this was the first time WCS conducted a survey, and I was part of it. So I did science surveys, deployed and retrieved camera traps, did scat analysis to see what they're eating in a city, and like, is there any plastic? Is there any like just seeing what they're eating, and are they hunting or scavenging? And yeah, and they were also doing some interview analysis to understand the interactions people living near them are having. For example, fishermen or foragers or the tribal people living inside the mangroves or the park. And I also organized a lot of data for the Jackal project. Next. So these are just a few videos. We play it.
I think I might. Here. The internet down here is quite slow, so it
yeah.
might just be.
I think, yeah. It's fine, I guess.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I think you can just next. Yeah, this is another video. Yeah.
That's me in the mangrove barefoot trying to not step on a venomous snake. But yeah, it was pretty fun because I didn't want to get my shoes dirty, and I slipped a bunch of times, but it was such a cool experience. And some highlights was that I was trekking the deciduous patches in Mumbai with like forest laborers, and then also I was knee deep in the mangroves, and then I was also walking through rural settlements. And I did not expect like wildlife would take me in a variety of places inside my own city, which was so interesting to me. And I had never explored my city with this lens because I've experienced a lot of wildlife, like conducted a lot of wildlife research in East Africa, Scotland, and now I'm in North America. So it was really cool to go back to my city and see it through a different lens. And yeah, tips. If you really like a project and if you want to be part of it, just email the people involved in it. I spammed the head of the program, and he did not respond to me for 3 months. Then I CC'd his boss, who's the director of who's the country head for WCF, and she responded to me saying, "Get him on board," and I was part of it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Well, there's 4 more presentations, so if you could stay or root on the last 4 folks, last 4 groups, that'd be awesome. Up next we have Val. You gotta keep it green.
So, my name's Val. I don't know why I did my full name. And I was out in the Mount Deer National Forest in Oregon, which is 1.7 million acres. Pretty huge, but it's pretty separated, as you can see. But it has 2 claims to fame. It is home to the largest fungus in the world, the honey mushroom. Back I did see a lot on malaria, and then it was also site of a Mount Deer wildlife refuge standoff, if you guys ever heard about that. And in fact, I did see a lot of strange folks around there. Next slide. So we were doing, I was working for an Oregon State University professor who was doing some like post-thinning monitoring for a different organization. I won't get into it, but there are a series of fixed plots that have been remeasured every year for about 14 years. And without going into too much detail, this is what a plot looked like. So we did for all the trees, we did the species, the height to find fuel, which is just basically how tall a flame would have to be to light a tree on fire. And then the crown class, DBHs, decay class. And then along those transects you see, we did the down woody material, which is a fancy way of saying I counted all the twigs along with a little hand clicker, which is pretty slow. And then we did the litter of duff as well, which is just simple measuring. And then in the little micro plots, also along the transects, we did vegetation fuel loading. So you might notice a lot of this has to do with fire and fuels, and also the likelihood of a ground fire. That is a huge concern out there. The amount here is mostly ponderosa pine, which is ideally pretty well fire adapted, but it hasn't, you guys know the story, it hasn't burned in a while. So we're doing thinning out there. We didn't get to do any prescribed burns, but we did work on several post-fire sites. Next. So the second half of the summer, I did old growth mortality. So a lot of old growth trees are dying pretty quick out in Oregon, especially ponderosas. There is living old growth that's huge, and the age was 47 or something. So anyway, we went around and there's a series of old growth trees that have also been monitored for the last, I think, 6 years. And we did the professor had taken the ages of it before, so we could actually look at the age of the tree when we were working it. We collected, again, pretty similar data, but then also if it was dead, we did the mortality age. Most of that was looking at the bark galleries to see what kind of beetle it was, because each beetle tends to do its own types of galleries. Slide. So we also, professor's trying to put together a tree dating app. As I said, he already has all the ages. So he's, just go through and take a bunch of photos of all the trees, and then you could match up the age of photos. He might try and do something with AI, which is pretty neat, but it might also be less high tech. So some quick things about what I've learned. I don't have slides for this, but for what I learned was it's pretty tough to do management out in these huge national forests because there's a lot of different stakeholders. So the organization that the professor was working for, the Blue Mountain National Forest Partnership, I think it was a coalition of a bunch of different logging organizations, as well as ranchers, as well as environmentalists, some fishermen, and as well as tribal groups. And as you can imagine, they all have very different ideas for what to do with the forest. So it's kind of tricky to manage that. But you go next slide quickly. Some unqualified advice. Number one, go to events on campus. I was having a lot of trouble getting a job out in Oregon because I know a lot of people get jobs through professors that they know, and I'm only professors out in Oregon. But I started to go to a lot more events around here. There was a talk by a Washington State University professor about fire. It's a Wednesday evening. I was exhausted, but I was like, might as well go. Reached out to her via email afterwards. She was incredibly friendly and put me in contact with a bunch of her colleagues. And that's how I got the job. So go to events, email, and network with people. Thank you.
Well, I'm Lily, and this summer I interned at a garden right outside of Zion. It says a little bit more about that on this side. So, the ranch that I worked at is called Zion Mountain Ranch. It has an operating garden, a horse ranch, and there's also a hotel attached to it. It's about half-mile away from the east side of Zion. So that's where I was. The next slide says more about what my internship was. So I specifically worked on the garden. We tried to run things as sustainable and environmentally friendly as we could be, which is really cool. So we use practices such as no-till. Most of the sources of our materials were actually on site, which is really cool. We did all of our own composting, made our own potting soil, all of that. We also did drip line irrigation, and then we were also in the process of setting up vermicomposting, which is composting with worms, which is really cool. And this was just a really important project to me because I feel like a lot of times I've learned that agriculture and climate change are kind of at odds with each other, but this internship was a way of showing that they can work together. Yeah. So these are some of the specific projects that I worked on. Something that was really cool was that so we tried to integrate some of the natural species in the environment into our agriculture ecosystem. So we had some song sparrows, and then we also had some American robins. So I actually made bird houses to attract both of those species to our farm. And then down here, that is our verma compost facility. And then this is an example of the irrigation lines that I developed. And we did obviously run our farm out of Utah, which is really hot and dry. So this is just a system that can conserve as much water as possible and make it directly sourced to the plants. As I said, I did a lot of weeding, but I'll get to that more in a different slide. So I guess spoiler alert, my internship actually had to end early for certain reasons, and I will be getting into that soon. But just starting off with the positives of my internship, I'd never been that far out west before. It was a really interesting experience to see that different ecosystem. I also learned about many farming practices that I didn't know about before. Farming was something that was definitely new to me. I'm a natural resource major, so most of the time I'm focused on natural ecosystems. So it was really cool to see ecology in a way that you could manipulate and develop. I thought it showed me a different view of ecology. And then in terms of what went wrong, essentially the site that I was at wasn't the best environment for my development and my growth. And yeah, it's a little difficult to talk about, I guess, but I was put in some unsafe living conditions. And then also in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I just kind of felt like there wasn't much of that. I actually do have a slide more on the specifics about that. So yeah, down here I kind of talked about how I was housed in a motel in the middle of nowhere. And as a young woman, that did make me feel a bit unsafe. And in terms of the other reason I felt unsafe was just because the environment that I was at wasn't very inclusive of identities that the owner of the ranch didn't identify with, I guess is the best way to put it. And a lot of the farming practices that I learned about, we also just weren't really allowed to carry out. So I have a picture down here of the weed issue that we had. Something that I learned about, which was really interesting, is that when you use manure for composting, it should be processed because the foods that the animal consumes, those seeds are still viable. We weren't allowed to process those for whatever reason, so we had a really big weeding issue. It wasn't allowing many of the plants to grow, and it also just took a lot of labor that was a bit unnecessary, I guess. So I guess like those are the negatives, but I do just want to get more into the advice. Yeah, so also these are the ranch dogs that we had. These are my best friends out there. So I would say if you are planning on doing this type of internship, you should prepare to live in a remote location. Your biggest resource will be yourself, and that's something that I think that you need to be prepared for mentally. I will also say that the place that facilitated my internship was Southern Utah University. They have this intergovernmental internship cooperative. They were incredibly accommodating for me. They were incredibly supportive. They have many internships in Zion National Park and also throughout Utah, Nevada, Arizona. I absolutely recommend doing an internship through this organization. Yeah, have a backup plan. I actually ended up going to Yosemite after I had to leave, and that was really incredible. That was a lifelong goal. So yeah, have a backup plan. I think that it's really important to set boundaries for yourself in these situations. Since you are so far away, you are your own supporter. I think that was something that I really took away. I think going into the internship, I kind of felt like everything, I guess like I was in other people's control, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I kind of realized that I really can take control of my future, my safety, all those things. And I think it's really important to understand that going into an internship, that if it is an unsafe situation, you do have the power to leave. And then also see as much as you can. Obviously, I was right by Zion, but there were also so many other incredible national parks that I saw, both in Utah and Arizona, Nevada, California. A lot of wonderful places. So yeah, that's pretty much a summary of my internship. Thank you.
Two more presentations for the night.
Hi, I'm Isabelle. I'm Fiona. This summer we worked on Mount Mansfield.
So the work that we were doing, we were acting as research assistants for Catherine. Hi, Catherine. And we were doing a vegetative alpine survey for the Green Mountain Club. We basically collected data on the presence and frequency of vascular plants, mosses, and lichens. And our day-to-day work included plotting sites, so that meant just like measuring and looking at the quadrats, and then counting the amount of diversity that we saw within those, measuring soil pH and soil depth.
We surveyed a total of 8 sites. We had 4 summit sites, which were located at or near the chin. They're indicated by the arrows on the right. We had 2 ridgeline sites, which were located right off of the ridgeline trail, which are the ones in the middle, and then 2 peatland sites, which are also located right off the trail, and they're the ones closest to the nose.
So why was the work important? The last survey was conducted in 1995 by Bill Howland. And basically we were looking at how the composition of the alpine zone has changed in the past 30 years, which is especially important as it is going to inform future conservation efforts, especially in the face of climate change and changes in the alpine zone as temperature continues to increase. And so hopefully the Green Mountain Club can use this info to continue to educate the public on climate change, and then also what we can do to preserve alpine plants.
Some of our highlights of the experience included really beautiful views every day. We also got to connect with some really awesome people, including Green Mountain Club stewards and VCE ornithologists who are also doing work up on the ridgeline. And perhaps the most exciting thing was that we found the second population of purple crowberry in the state, which you can see me looking at the handlets in the middle. But this plant was believed to have been extirpated from Vermont since 1908. And the first population was rediscovered on Mount Mansfield just last year. And then we found the second population this summer, which is really awesome.
Yeah, so key learnings, basically one of the big things that we had to do was like be able to talk to the public about the work that we were doing on the ridgeline. We would be sitting there counting plants and people would just sort of stare at us and wait for us to explain what we were doing. And that's what we had to do so that they wouldn't get mad at us for, looking and being in the alpine zone. Another thing is just like, sometimes the conditions weren't the best, especially when you're in a cloud. It can be difficult to just like sit there and stare at plants. But when you're with fun people and you're like able to kind of enjoy the experience, it can make all the difference. And then finally, the smallest plants are as beautiful as the biggest trees. We got to really just go in depth and see all of the amazing plants that we got to, just experience and envelop ourselves in this summer.
In terms of equity, diversity, and social justice, as you can see, we are 3 white, able-bodied people, and a lot of people that we interacted with and saw up on Mount Mansfield were also white and able-bodied. So there's definitely room for improvement in terms of access and opportunity, especially in terms of who can hike Mount Mansfield. Like, I'm sure that you guys know that there's the gondola there. There's also a toll road, but neither of those actually go to the top of Mansfield. So for people who may not be able-bodied, it's really hard for them to actually get up on top of the mountain.
So then tips for future interns. We both found this internship by just reading through Megan's emails and reading through the experiential learning emails. So just like being able to read it all the way through really can get you an amazing opportunity. Also, be flexible. We didn't really know what we were walking into when we signed up. It was sort of outlined, but it was very much up in the air. And because we were able to be flexible, it turned out to work perfectly. And, we had a good time. And then also just a willingness to learn. Neither of us had really done any field work before this summer. So just being able to be flexible again and have the willingness to learn, we were able to accomplish so much.
Thank you.
All right, last but not least, Alma. Woohoo!
So I worked at a little house museum in Ridgewood, New Jersey. You can go to the next slide. Called the James Rose Center. It was designed and built in the 50s and pretty continuously was being redesigned. This guy, he was a kook. He never wanted his design to stop changing. Next slide. So yeah, we're in Ridgewood. He was really infatuated with the idea of blending indoor and outdoor spaces architecturally. And he was actually expelled from the Harvard Graduate School of Design because he kept proposing these modern ideas that were not using plants as just ornaments. They're making them focal points. And for his home that he actually ended up building that I worked at, he used a lot of recycled materials from like wood, scavenged copper for like cool modern sculptures, very artsy stuff. And it's a very much an ecological haven amid the suburbia that Ridgewood is. You can go to the next slide. I was welcomed by a little deer just sitting there. That was the first day I met my coworkers and the first day I met Ginny. And also the last, I never saw him again, but the next one. So one of my main tasks was archiving. I sorted through maybe 300, 400 personal letters of James Rose, his sister, his mother, most of when he was in the war. He was stationed in Okinawa, he was burying bodies, it was awful, but that's where he got a passion for landscape design. When he came back to New York, he had a pretty successful firm. That box is all of my working and I'm really proud of it. That's my legacy. We added actual weather tight bins. We'll get into that later. Next one. I also was a tour guide, so I gave a lot of tours. We're actually like famous on basically the Chinese equivalent of Instagram, called the Little Red Book, which is an interesting name. But we have a lot of people coming from far and wide to take tours of the house and learn about why he designed it the way he did, how ecologically sound, modern, etc. So the next slide. And then my little project was redesigning his roof garden that he had created. It really flourished around 40 years ago when he was tending to it. And obviously before he died in 91. That's a little graphic I made just to map out where the sun hits the roof. So there are some architectural design elements, those two graphics. I just like downloaded some like little off-brand Photoshop tool and just sketched plans over the existing roof that's there. The next one. So some of the important stuff. I think this really proves that ecological designs can be used in homes, and it's a really good way to sort of deviate from the norm of the suburban home. This house is technically 3 suites spread across this weird trapezoidal plot of land. It's not the setback square footprint home that you see anywhere else. And for that reason, and the fact that there's a lot of tree cover in the area because he built the home like in between these like old growth trees. And he also like built pools with fountains. It actually cools down the area a lot. So even on some of New Jersey's hottest days, I was kind of chilling. It was kind of like a cave in there. It's not too humid, but it's a lot better than like the beating sun a few feet away. Key learnings, again, archival practices, gardening practices, and the accessibility of ecological design. I kind of went into all of those. You can just skip ahead. Diving into the history, I found like an old deed from like 150 years ago from this guy's like great grandfather in Pennsylvania. It was crazy. And then there's also like these old photos that we had to use an old tiny slide looking machine. I don't know the word for it, but they're really lovely. Next slide's good. Also learned some stuff about how to make a structurally sound roof garden. Don't plant the dirt directly on top of your flat roof. It will make it rot and it'll be a hassle for your successors to restore your home with. Yeah. And if you're gonna build near trees, I don't know. Maybe don't like make a meditation space right next to like a really old tree because it will fall and it'll be under construction for 6 years. Next slide's good. Yeah, I kind of talked about this a little bit. I mean, I think for me, this house kind of proves that we can implement sustainable practices in building a house. This is obviously like a really rudimentary example of a sustainable home because he built it in the 50s. But you can coexist with natural areas in your home, even in a very suburban state like New Jersey. Next slide's good. Yeah, and I think just making it more tangible can also make it more accessible. Obviously, we offer tours and just trying to educate people about using plants in designs, like being one with nature. And also, of course, the artistic history of all of his designs. Next slide are some tips. My favorites are making to-do lists, taking breaks, because otherwise you'll get really tired, asking for help. And one of my personal favorites, one of my coworkers had a boyfriend that worked at a local cafe, so it's really good. Take me up. That is not her. That was my British coworker, George, who was really also interested in landscape architecture. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, everyone, thanks for staying till the very end. I hope you grab some snacks on your way